Hello everyone. Viewers wrote to me and asked me what I thought about the greatest threats to our national security. So, I want to break this down in two parts. Now, in my view, we obviously have external threats to our national security. You've got China, you've got Russia, you've got Iran, you've got North Korea, and then you've got the issues that are going on in the Middle East. In my view, we can handle those threats fairly well. We certainly put a lot of resources to counter those threats, in terms of the military budget, our national security policy. We've got over 800 bases and facilities overseas, the diplomatic, financial, and economic initiatives that we have. So the external threats are well, taken care of. And we pay close attention to those. We've got, multiple intelligence agencies looking outwards from the United States at potential threats that may be near term and long term. So what I want to really talk about are, in my view, the top four domestic threats to our national security, because in my assessment, it's not the external threats. Those are easy to identify, but it's really the internal threats that are difficult to identify or even talk about that we need to pay attention to, because a house divided will fall. So we need to pay attention to these internal threats that we've got within the United States. And the first one I would talk about would be our border, the southern border. We've talked about this before. It's essentially wide open. There's anywhere from 2 to 3 million people coming across that border in the south. There's all sorts of drugs coming across, the cartels, and potentially terrorists. And frankly, as a result, we've got 20 million illegals in the United States. So that, in my mind, without a secure border, we don't have a country. It's really as simple as that. So that is probably the number one security threat that we have in the United States. The second security threat I would say that we have internally is the military-industrial complex. This is a vast apparatus of defense contractors that have an incredible amount of influence in our foreign policy. And despite the warnings of President Eisenhower in his farewell address to the nation, talked about the military-industrial complex and forewarned us.
In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced power exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. Only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together.
Now, this was a 5-star general, President of the United States. He knew this industry inside out because he helped create it during World War II, him and General Marshall. So, he knew that if this thing grew into such, in such size and influence and power, it would take over the U.S. government. And for all intents and purposes, it has got incredible amount of influence. And it does that through our retired politicians and generals. Most of them go work for them. I mean, there's a case where, 26 out of 4-star generals out of 32 work for the military-industrial complex. Unacceptable. We continue to let this behemoth influence our foreign policy, influence our domestic spending, and also influence, how we go to war. So if you hearken back to how we ended up in Iraq, they sponsor many of these think tanks to keep us engaged in prolonged wars. And prolonged wars essentially mean what? Profit. So they're in it for the money. Unfortunately, although they profit from money, our losses are in blood, our sons and daughters. So the military-industrial complex needs to be curtailed and regulated, heavily regulated. They should not be able to contribute to politicians. It's really that simple. Zero contributions for politicians. So that means all the big companies out there should not be able to contribute to a political campaign. So that's the first one. The second one is we've got to curtail their ability to hire former politicians and retired generals. at a minimum, there ought to be a ban that 5 years after leaving government service or the military, you can't join these firms, because what's happening is they're hiring these retired generals and politicians, bringing them on board as consultants, and then these people go out and do the pitch. And they don't give us disclosure. So General so-and-so will be sitting on TV and talking about how the United States needs to attack Iran, blah, blah, blah. But we don't know who's funding this guy to run his mouth. In my mind, they should all, general officers, retired general officers and politicians should be wearing those NASCAR sponsor jackets with their labels on it, various companies that are sponsoring or paying them. So the public, the American public, knows exactly where this person's coming from. We need full disclosure. And we need regulation from the military-industrial complex, because it's in their interest to get us into a war at the end of the day. And quite frankly, all they think about is profit. They don't think about the long-term consequences or effects. You've got, upwards of 40 veterans a day that are taking their lives. They don't think about shit like that. All they care about is the immediate return and what their quarterly financials are going to look like, and their stock value. That's what they care about. Unfortunately, as a result of this, there's millions of dollars that they're spending to have this control on policy, on domestic budget, on foreign policy, and also control on wars. I mean, shit. We were in Afghanistan for 20 years. We were in Iraq for over a decade. We've been in Syria for nearly a decade now, And the main reason is because they don't want it to stop. They want this thing to continue on, because there's not only the defense budget, but then they get money from the supplementals also that Congress passes. And most of the congressmen and senators are getting political donations from these companies. Unacceptable. So that's the number 2 threat in my mind that we need to pay attention to, our national security. Third threat, I would say, is this right and left-wing extremism. Okay, so you've got, the country is essentially divided right down the middle. You've got one side that believes in nationalism, that believes in, supposedly family values, is pro-life, and some consider to be white supremacists. On the other side, you've got the left, which believes in social equity, environmental and socialism, and many believe anarchy if they don't get their way. So you've got this country that's literally divided politically. It's divided ideologically. You can call them conservatives, liberals, left, right, blue, red, and all this stuff. And we need, sage leadership that can reunite us as a country. And to do that, it's going to be challenging because you have to make compromises. But we don't need leaders that are going to continue to divide us, and keep pointing fingers to the other side. We need people to bring us together as Americans. Because we can't afford this for too long, because there's other nations that are taking advantage of all this. The division within the United States. They don't need to spend a lot on their military because they're falling apart from within. So, that could be solved through good sage leadership. The fourth topic I want to talk about is the influence of foreign lobbyists. This is absolutely unbelievable. We've got so many foreign lobby groups in the United States that are, again, filling the coffers of our politicians with donations through a variety of means, and then trying to influence foreign policy and our national security strategy, and also foreign aid. So they'll spend millions to get billions in return. Okay, and the big daddy of them all is APEC, the American Israeli Public Affairs or Committee. They're spending a ton of money. A very powerful group in the United States. But in the past, what they did was they just lobbied, congressmen and senators, policy issues, essentially. But since 2021, there's APEC-PAC. So they're taking an active role in our politics. So they're picking candidates across the board and deciding, who runs against whom. If they don't agree with the candidate's position, they'll spend millions of dollars advocating against that candidate through advertisement and whatnot. So they're taking an active role. So what's happened is 2021, they supported 365 candidates to run for Congress in those elections. 342 members of Congress received APEC money. That's unbelievable. In 2024, they've already allocated $100 million. Every single congressional leader has received APEC money. So think about this, on both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats. So APEC essentially has become the third rail of our politics. So it doesn't matter if you're Republican or Democrat, you still have to bow to APEC's desires. And what does that mean? That means it's got an incredible influence on our foreign policy, national security, and foreign aid. So they give millions to these congressmen, and in return, Congress passes legislation for billions of dollars going to Israel. The most recent one is $17.6 billion going to Israel. So the American taxpayer ends up paying for that. So it's essentially, so that's, and it's not only APEC. There's also other foreign lobby groups from a variety of countries that that have a foothold in Washington, D.C., so they can influence U.S. policy. And we need to stop this. And the way we can stop it is have strict regulations. No foreign money. You cannot give money. Even an American citizen cannot give money on behalf of a foreign country. And we need to clean this up, because this is just political corruption. And a lot of politicians are making a lot of money out of this for allegiance to some other country. And that's wrong. It really is that simple. So these are the 4 internal threats that I think we need to first address to get America back on its feet. First one is border control. We need to secure the border. Second one is the military-industrial complex, that we need to have tight regulations so they cannot make any political contributions, nor can retired politicians or generals go work for them for the first 5 years after they leave government service. So that's the second one. The third one is this right and left-wing extremism. Okay, that can be solved very quickly by good, sage leadership. We're all Americans first. So let's stop the finger pointing at each other and try to inflame this rhetoric and ideology and bring everybody back together based on the values of our Constitution. And those values are quite simple. Human rights, equality, and freedom of speech. And we need to protect those values that are espoused in our Constitution. That's what bonds us together. Rather than, focusing on, what my religious and ideological values are, as opposed to your religious and ideological values. That separates us as a country. So we need to bring it back together. And the last one is the influence of foreign lobbyists. You've got all these shady organizations that are, they pretend to be in America's interest, but they're not, quite frankly. They're in the interest of the country that they represent or that they lobby for. And they basically want our money, or they want our weapons, or they want to draw us into wars, and so our sons and daughters go overseas and pay the price in blood. So these are the 4 greatest threats I think are out there. You may think otherwise. Please leave it in the comments. I'd love to have that discussion and learn from you as well. So but we need to pay attention to this, because I'm not worried about the China's, Russia's, North Korea's, or Iran. We can handle that, not a problem. And we've got an incredible amount of capabilities. But the issue is we can't handle the things that are going on inside our house. We need to tighten things up inside our house to make sure that, one, the government is transparent, it's working in the best interests of America and the Americans and its citizens. And the only way it can do that is by securing its borders, cleaning up the influence of the military-industrial complex and the lobbyists, and bringing these ideologies that are dividing us back together through good leadership. And it can be done. I have no doubt. I've got good, strong faith in America. That's all I got. Stay rugged. Con out.